My guest at this time is Andrew C. McCarthy. He's a former federal prosecutor. He's also a contributing editor and columnist at National Review Online, and he's joined us many times throughout the Mueller investigation and all the different legal twists and turns into what happened in the 2016 campaign and otherwise. And today we want to get his reaction to what is causing a big stir in Washington today, and that's a story from Buzzfeed alleging that President Trump personally and specifically directed his former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, to commit perjury before the United States Congress about when a Trump organization project in Moscow was shelved. The testimony from Cohen and others said it was January of 2016. Ultimately, it was the summer of 2016. And so what do we know for sure? What does it mean if this is true? And a whole lot more. Andy, as always, good to have you with us.
Great to be with you.
Well, it's not often that we get to use the word suborn on national radio and so forth, but suborning perjury is kind of what the allegation is here. We heard it during the Clinton impeachment investigation a couple of decades ago. So if this is actually verified, is this curtains for the Trump administration?
Well, look, lying to Congress is a serious matter, and I think that I've pointed out that I think in retrospect, it was a mistake to seek Clinton's impeachment because there wasn't political support for it. And the lesson that we can draw from the Clinton impeachment is that when misconduct by the president is remote from the president's core responsibilities, the chance that you're going to get political support for removal of the president is slim, or even nil. But I think the comeback to that, Greg, will be that here, as in the Clinton case, what you would be dealing with would be the allegation that the president put people, or at least one person, up to lying in order to subvert investigations. And the difference between this and the Clinton case is that while the transaction that Clinton was trying to subvert was not really directly related to his presidential responsibilities. It was a civil lawsuit which was about sexual harassment that had actually occurred before Clinton was president. In this instance, we're talking about an attempt to minimize connections to Russia for purposes of trying to acquire the office of the presidency, that is, to win the election. And when the framers talked about impeachment, what they focused in on was both abuse of power in the office and misconduct that was committed in order to acquire the office. So while ordinarily we might say that high crimes and misdemeanors should not be something that applies to misconduct by the president outside or prior to his presidency, for example, to the extent that the president was involved with let's say, the two women who have alleged affairs with the president. I don't know that involves any criminal misconduct, but if you consider that misbehavior and unbecoming of a president, it's something that happened 10 years before he was president. That's different from activity that happens before you achieve the presidency, but activity that's connected to the campaign in order to acquire the office. So I guess that would be the distinction.
We're talking with former federal prosecutor Andy McCarthy. He's also a contributing editor and columnist at National Review Online. And now we get to the if true part, because that's the qualifier and the disclaimer for all of this. First of all, it's coming from Buzzfeed, which has had to suffer from some egg on its face for previous stories, most famously the details of the dossier. And now the author of this story, Anthony Cormier, appeared on CNN this morning and admitted that he has not personally seen any of the evidence which would back this up, although he does say that the two officials that he has talked to and are unnamed in the story are fully, as he says, 100% read into that aspect of the special counsel's investigation. So what actually needs to happen to prove that this is true?
Well, there's information, Greg, that really cuts both ways here. On the one hand, contrary to Cohen's involvement in the hush money payments and trying to frame those as in-kind campaign contributions for purposes of campaign finance violations and then trying to extend that to the president, what you have here is something that's much more common and much more straightforward, which is, lying to investigators in order to minimize something that would have been politically damaging. And the beneficiary of Cohen's lies, even more than Cohen, one would think, would have been President Trump. So it's not hard to imagine that he would do this. In other words, it's not nonsensical to think that the person who would benefit from the misstatements would be choreographing them. We know that Mueller does have some other similar evidence. When the New York Times confronted Donald Trump Jr. about the so-called Trump Tower meeting, this meeting he took with the Russian lawyer, we know that Don Jr., at least the reporting is that Don Jr. was in consultation with his father, then the president, and misled the Times about the genesis of the meeting after that consultation, only to sort of fess up finally when the Times explained to him that they had his emails and were about to publish them. Only then did the true story come out that he took the meeting expecting to get campaign dirt. So you do have this other instance of apparently the president getting involved in order to minimize contacts with Russia. So there's that. There's the fact that if I were in the president's camp, I think what I'd be most disturbed about in terms of the Buzzfeed story is that this doesn't look like it's something that came directly from Cohen. According to the report, the special counsel's office learned about the alleged direction by President Trump to Cohen to mislead Congress by doing interviews with multiple witnesses in the Trump organization, perhaps in the White House, and then looking at internal documents like company emails and text messages at the Trump organization. That's what led them, we're told, to figure this out. And it was only then that they brought Cohen in and confronted him, and it was then that Cohen gave this up. So this is not, if that's really how it happened, it's not as susceptible to the claim that this is something that got peddled by Cohen to the special counsel and they're jumping all over it. It would seem that they have this corroborated, and if that's the case, it's obviously much more serious for the White House than otherwise. On the other side of the ledger, I would point out that Mueller obviously has not charged the president or in any charges that he has brought hinted that the president has committed this offense. It's fair enough there to point out that there's Justice Department guidance that says you can't indict a sitting president, so perhaps you wouldn't expect Mueller to have filed anything along those lines. But you would think, at least I would think, as a former prosecutor, that if he were thinking of charges like this, he would have had Cohen plead guilty to a conspiracy to obstruct justice so that he could allocute to the fact that he was involved with President Trump, that this was not him going off on his own to mislead Congress. He did it at the president's direction. Mueller hasn't done that. And I believe, Greg, that the original reporting that we saw when Cohen pled guilty was that he said that he gave this false testimony to Congress in order to be consistent with what he understood to be the Trump campaign's messaging about Russia. That is, he didn't claim at the time, at least as far as I know, that Trump had put him up to this. And I know that it kind of led me to wonder and led other people to wonder, had Cohen told the special counsel that Trump didn't put him up to this? In other words, is this an instance of perhaps Cohen now changing his story? And if that's the case, would that be so damaging potentially to a case that the special counsel would bring that on balance the special counsel would decide not to charge? So it could be it could be an instance of it being a weak case, or it could just be an instance of, Mueller has not finished his work yet, and he's trying to tighten everything up before he ultimately goes forward and charges. We'll just have to see how that plays itself out.
Just to put a bow on it, Andy, I want to go back to a point you made a moment ago, and that's the importance of documentation to back up the allegation here, because as a prosecutor, given that Michael Cohen is basically going to prison for perjury and some other things, of course, I would imagine that you can't base a whole lot just on his testimony, given the fact you've convicted him for not being truthful.
Yeah, Greg, that's a great point. And usually what happens in a case where you have somebody, if you have somebody who's told one lie and it's kind of an understandable lie under the circumstances, you can usually get a jury to buy on to the idea that the guy's unreliability is limited to the one understandable area where he's not told the truth, and he might be believable on other things. On the other hand, when you have somebody who serially lies to the point where he's virtually a pathological liar, which seems to be closer to the case with Cohen, what prosecutors will usually tell a jury is that we'll never ask you to convict anyone on the basis of this guy's testimony standing alone, and that the only way that you should credit it is if it's been corroborated by other things that you can hang your hat on, like documentary evidence and the like. So, documentary evidence to have documentary evidence or tape-recorded evidence is usually gold for a prosecutor, because documents can't be cross-examined, and if they're damning enough, they're very strong proof in a trial.
A lot more to come perhaps on this. We will find out. Andy, always love to have your analysis. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Andrew C. McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, contributing editor, and columnist at National Review Online. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.